Hey guys, welcome to another Thursday edition of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. My name is Nick. You guys know if you've been watching the channel for a while at least, I've been a big punk fan for a long time, since the mid '90s, so about 25 plus years. But and there for a while, punk rock, it was in the mainstream for a while and then kind of went away, and it never like really disappeared though. It just kind of left out of the mainstream. But today I'm going to talk about some albums that over the course of the last 5 or 6 years have been really great, really underrated punk albums. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you click on that link down below. Go check out the Vinyl Den Facebook group. I know I say it every episode, but it's just a cool place to continue the music conversation. There's also a couple other links down there. There's one for the Vinyl Den merch page, where we've got Vinyl Den t-shirts and sweatshirts on there. There's a link for the Vinyl Den Spotify and Apple Music playlists, where every week we're just compiling music that we're talking about here on the channel, putting it together on a nice playlist for everyone to enjoy. And there's also a link for the Vinyl Den Patreon page. If you want to support the show, it's always greatly appreciated. You can support the show for as little as $1 a month. Of course, if you enjoy the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So like I said in the intro, I've been a big punk fan for a long time. I think it was when And Out Come the Wolves was released back in 1995. It was like shortly, I think it was the day after my 16th birthday actually when that album came out. So as soon as I heard that album, that was kind of the album that kind of hooked me. I started checking out some older bands, Operation Ivy, Bad Religion, bands like that. And, punk rock or punk, it's a big umbrella term. There's a bunch of different, subgenres that go into punk, whether it's, hardcore, there's obviously pop punk or punk rock is what I call it. Emo punk, there's skate punk, ska punk. Like I said, just a bunch of different subgenres of punk that you can kind of go through. And I've been a big fan of all of it, really, for the most part. But, like I said, I think after American Idiot kind of came out, even though American Idiot really isn't, it's more of a rock album than a punk album. But I think it was like that mid-2000s period where punk really kind of fell out of the mainstream. Like I said, even though there's a lot of really great punk music that's been made over the course of the last 20, 25 years, there's some stuff, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, that have been really great albums. Some of the best punk music of the last 30 years, and it's really gone largely unnoticed. I think of the 8 albums I was going to talk about today, I think there's only 2 of them that charted in the top 100 on Billboard. One was at 75, the other one was at 74. So, like I said, largely these albums have been really unnoticed and kind of forgotten about by the mainstream. So the first one I've got is an album that it was released in 2021. It was one of 2 albums that I was going to talk about today that were released last year. And this was the most commercially successful of the 8 I was going to talk about. This one hit number 74 on Billboard Top 200. And that is Turn Out the Dial by Dropkick Murphys. If you are unfamiliar with Dropkick Murphys, they're in that Celtic punk genre, which I think is them, Flogging Molly. There's only a couple of like big Celtic punk bands. Dropkick Murphys probably the biggest of all of them. And, Dropkick Murphys have had a lot of success over the years. I think Blackout in 2003 was probably their best album until Turn Up That Dial. This is a fantastic album. There's a lot of really great, this is a little more reminiscent of that late 90s, early 2000s Dropkick Murphys sound. So I think it's kind of a return to form. And it's definitely one that I saw a lot of people picking up over the latter part of 2021, but like I said, it's one that largely kind of went unnoticed, and it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't listened to this one. So I've been a pretty big Good Charlotte fan ever since the beginning of their career. I saw them open for MXPX back in like the later part of 2000, like right before they blew up. And as soon as they took the stage, I want to say it was like the first song or 2, I knew right away they were going to be a big band, and obviously they were. They had 5 huge albums there in the early part of the 2000s, and then they went on like a 6-year hiatus. And in 2016, they released Youth Authority, which the band even has said was not a great album. They kind of rushed some of the stuff on there. They really weren't in sync during the recording process. So when the next album came out, which this is Generation RX, this was released in 2018. This is really like the Dropkick Murphys album. This is really a return to form, and I think this is probably one of their top 2 or 3 albums that they've ever done, and largely it kind of went unnoticed. This did make it all the way up to 164th on the Billboard Top 200, so it did chart. It didn't chart really all as high as some of their other albums did, but from beginning to end, like I said, this is a return to form for the band. I think that their writing style, just the musical collaboration between the band members, was much more in sync than what they were on Youth Authority. Even though I thought Youth Authority was an okay album, out of all their studio albums, I really do consider it their worst. But Generation RX, it got a little bit of airplay when it was first released. And then I don't even think they really toured much off of this album either, which was really unfortunate because it is a really, really great album. Like I said, one of their top 2 or 3 albums in my opinion. Goldfinger is one of those quintessential 90s punk bands. They had a couple of big hits in the late 90s, early 2000s, but then they went like on a 9-year stretch where they didn't release any new music until 2017. They released The Knife. And what John Feldmann did, John Feldmann is one of the co-founders of Goldfinger. He put together like a super group for this album, So it's John Feldmann on vocals and guitar. It's Philip Sneed on guitar. I don't remember what band he was in. He was in Story of the Year. That's what it was. And then Mike Herrera from MXPX and Travis Barker from Blink-182. And you would expect, high quality from that lineup, and that's exactly what you got with The Knife. This is, in my opinion, Goldfinger's absolute best album that they've ever done. And it, it's got those great pop punk hooks that John Feldmann's very famous for. And it, from beginning to end, there's not a bad track on this album. I'd probably put this in the top 10 of punk albums of the last, 20 years, really. The other album that's on my list that was released last year is an album that I know I've talked about in at least 2 or 3 other episodes on the Vinyl Done here, and that is 2021's Internet Killed the Rockstar by Mod Sun. If you are unfamiliar with Mod Sun was the drummer for Four Letter Lie and Scary Kids Scaring Kids, kind of earlier part of his career. But that's kind of where he kind of cut his teeth in the punk scene, or in the rock scene, was with those with those 2 bands. And after Scary Kids Scaring Kids broke up, he kind of went off on his own and had his own rap career for a little while. Did 3 rap albums, and then kind of went back to his roots and did Internet Killed the Rockstar. This was something that he did together with John Feldmann. John Feldmann has done a lot in the punk scene with production over the last couple of years, and probably several of the albums I was going to talk about today, he had a hand in. This is definitely a big one that he did. And, this was probably my first or second favorite album total from last year. So it's definitely a great album. And it's one that is actually pretty hard to find on vinyl, but they just reissued it through his website not too long ago. But it's one that definitely deserved more acclaim than it got. When you've got artists like Machine Gun Kelly doing really similar kind of things and getting number 1 on the Billboard charts, and then this album, which is a much better album than anything that Machine Gun Kelly has done over the last couple of years, not really getting the same recognition. It's really unfortunate because it is a fantastic album. And like I said, if you're a fan of the Tickets to My Downfall, anything that Machine Gun Kelly has done over the last couple of years, and you haven't listened to this one, make sure you do check it out. I will say real quick on the Mod Sun Internet Killed the Rockstar, if you are unfamiliar with Mod Sun, make sure you go and check out his YouTube channel, because that's got a documentary on there called Remember Me Just Like This. It's really kind of cool to go through. It's got a lot of interviews with like family members and things like that on their home videos. Kind of gives you a lot of perspective about his career and kind of his process from the beginning all the way through the creation of Internet Killed the Rockstar. So it's definitely cool. Make sure you go check that out on his YouTube channel. So if you guys have been watching the channel for a while, you guys know I'm a big MXPX fan. I have been for, since 97, 98, I think is when I first started really getting into them. So back in 2018, they weren't on a label anymore. They were kind of doing their own thing. And they decided to they were going to crowdsource funding for a new album. So their goal was $50,000 through Kickstarter. And I want to say they hit just over or just under, right around $250,000 through just over 4,000 donations. So it was really kind of cool. They were able to do this thing and put together their self-titled album in 2018. And there was a period of time where MXPX almost went away from their punk roots, and they were doing a little bit more like rock stuff and different kind of music. They definitely evolved through the 2000s. And this is very much so, very reminiscent of their 90s punk albums. It's a lot faster, a lot harder than some of the stuff that they've done over the course of the last 15 years before this. So, it's an album that, if you are unfamiliar with MXPX, this is one of their better ones. I'd probably put this in the top 5 or 6 albums overall. But it's an album that, the funny thing was, they released this album a day later than they should have. Had they released this album a day earlier, it would have made it onto the Billboard Top 200. I want to say they were like 202 or 203, with missing out on that extra day. So it would have been kind of cool to see them chart, because they haven't charted, I don't think, since 2003 was their last album that they had on the Billboard charts. 2020 was a great year for punk music. And these last 3 albums all came out in 2020. They were all great. And I will say, going into with this whole list, none of this is ranked other than the last album. The last album I'm going to talk about is, in my opinion, hands down the best punk album of the 2000s. But, the first one, this is another one that actually charted. This one charted at 75. So it was one spot behind the Dropkick Murphys album as far as like spots go on Billboard. And, he's definitely not all that underrated. He's definitely an artist that, especially in Europe, is huge. But here in the U.S., he's kind of, like I say, he's kind of underrated. And that is Youngblood. This is his album from 2020, Weird. And Youngblood has actually got a little bit more popular lately. He's working on a new album right now, and his new video has Sharon and Ozzy Osbourne in it. So there's definitely, I think, some people in the bigger rock scene, they're kind of paying a little bit more attention to what Youngblood is doing right now, just because, like I said, that exposure from Sharon and Ozzy definitely helped. Ian was actually asking me about Youngblood a few weeks back, and I was actually even surprised Ian even knew who Youngblood was, and I'm pretty sure it was because of the connection to the Osbournes. But Weird is an album that, like I said, he's an English punk rock musician. And, Youngblood's definitely done some different things over his brief career. I think this is only his second album that he's released. He's got a little more of a punk kind of mixed with hip-hop kind of rap flavor to his music. There's definitely more influences there on this album than you would typically get with other artists like Goldfinger or MXPX. This is definitely more of a blending of genres kind of thing, a little bit along the lines of what Mod Sun and Machine Gun Kelly have done over the last couple of years. But Youngblood hasn't reached that level of popularity. And this is an album that I'd say over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I can't stop listening to. I absolutely love this album. And it, in retrospect, had I have listened to this album when it was released in 2020, it definitely would have been, one of my top albums that year. But, in retrospect, it's definitely one of my tops. If I was to redo my list for 2020, it would definitely be on there. I'll also say, as far as like musicianship goes, Youngblood plays guitar and bass on almost every track on this album. There's also a couple of tracks he plays drums on. Obviously, he sings on all of it also. So he's definitely more of a more rounded musician than I think some people would even give him credit for. But he's definitely a cool guy. He's pretty popular on YouTube. You can check out his YouTube channel. Definitely make sure you check out Weird, because this is a fantastic album. The Bomb Pops are a band that have been around since 2007. And over the years, I've gone through a number of lineup changes, with really only Polly and Jen being the only mainstays of the band. They're the co-lead singers of the band. And they really kind of solidified their lineup in 2020 and released in the early part of 2020, Death in Venice Beach. And this is a really fantastic album. This was one that I was really blown away by. And I think this album would have been a lot bigger than it was had it not been for the pandemic. It was in April, early part of April, I was actually supposed to go to one of the listening parties for this album when it dropped. And that was like the week that everything shut down. So everything kind of shut down. They weren't able to tour off of this, and they didn't start touring until last year or late last year, in support of this album. But it's one that unfortunately we won't see any kind of follow up to, because Polly Van Dam unfortunately left the Bomb Pops late last year before they went on tour. She had some health issues, some family issues. There was some kind of turmoil within the band, so unfortunately she is no longer with the Bomb Pops. I think they're going to carry on. We'll see what they kind of do moving forward, but I think they probably do get knocked on a little bit, because hey, you got two chicks doing punk rock, which I have no problem with. I'm not trying to say I do, but that's kind of the attitude I see a lot out there in the music community, in the punk community. You get two chicks up there singing punk rock. What do they know about punk? This is a fantastic album, though, and if you are a punk fan and you haven't listened to this one, you're really missing out, because, like I said, you're not going to see anything, I don't think, at this level moving forward from the Bomb Pops. I know Polly was a big part of the musical process, but and her tracks are some of my favorites on here also. But it's definitely a great album. So if you made it this far in the episode, you have made it to the number one album. It's the only album I've got ranked in this whole 8 albums I'm going to talk about. And in my opinion, this is the best punk album since And Out Come the Wolves was released in 1995. This is a band that's been around since 2007. They've released a couple of albums. I think this is their third album that they've released. They've released a couple of EPs over the years, but this album is hands down their best album, and like I said, the best thing that's been released in punk music in the last 25 years. And that is Dancing with the Curse by Get Dead. Like I said earlier, punk has a lot of different subgenres. This is definitely more along the lines of that traditional kind of punk rock. If you think early to mid 90s Rancid, if you think Bad Religion, bands like that, that's what you're going to get with Get Dead. From beginning to end, it's a lot harder and faster than a lot of the other stuff that you've seen released over the last 25, 30 years. They're on a punk label. They're on with Fat Records, with Fat Mike. And I think that's kind of why they haven't gotten more popular, because Fat Records doesn't do a whole lot of promotion. They kind of let the music speak for themselves, which, I think is a good way to do it. But I think it's kind of hurt them overall, because it could have been a bigger album. The funny thing was, back in 2020, I think is when it was, I was watching a live stream from Fat Mike's house. Fat Mike, of course, the lead singer of NoFX, if you don't know who that is. He was doing a live stream from his house where he's having a bunch of bands during the lockdowns, or shortly, right when lockdowns were kind of letting up. He did a live stream from his house with a bunch of bands, and Get Dead got up there and did an absolutely insane set. And right away, I knew I had to go out there and find their album. And it's probably been one of my most played albums since I bought it. Like I said, if you're unfamiliar with Get Dead, go out there and check it out, because, like I said, it's more along the lines of that kind of Rancid kind of punk, the Bad Religion kind of punk rock. That I think if you are fans of those bands, you'll definitely love this album. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about any of these punk albums. Like I said, these are just 8 of the ones that I thought about off the top of my head. Really, no real particular order. Like I said, other than that Get Dead album, which I've absolutely loved. But drop me a comment. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know because there's a bunch of other punk albums that I'm sure a lot of people could throw out there also. So let me know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And that's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.